Today is the 14th of October, 2014, and this is episode 153. This program is intended for informational and educational purposes only. Cryptocurrency is new, highly experimental, and we're not experts, just obsessed companions walking the road towards a more peer-to-peer future. Welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the digital economy and the future of money. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today we're in Vegas for the recent Inside Bitcoins conference, where Overstock CEO Patrick Byrne revealed Medici, a new, well-funded development aiming to put some competition back into financial markets. Today's show has two parts. First, we listen in as Stephanie sits down for a private talk with Patrick and the guys from Counterparty. Then, we've got the full audio from the keynote after the break. It's a fun one, so we'll get right into it.
This is Stephanie Murphy for Let's Talk Bitcoin, and I'm here talking with Patrick Byrne at the Inside Bitcoins Las Vegas convention. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Stephanie, it's my honor.
It's great to have you back this time in person. Let's Talk Bitcoin, indeed. Okay, so you came on our show a couple months ago when your company, your CEO of Overstock.com, they just started to accept Bitcoin, and you were really excited at the time, and so were a lot of other people. You were getting some Bitcoin sales rolling in, and you said you had plans at the time, to keep maybe 10% of the Bitcoin, eventually pay employees in it at some point. Just want to check in first before we talk about your announcement at this conference. How is that going?
Good. It's rolling along. We opened it up a month ago, so now we accept it globally. Anywhere in the world, you can shop with us on Bitcoin. We can send it anywhere in the world. We love Bitcoin. We love what it represents. We're now global. And as of the announcement today, we're trying to disrupt the capital markets with a better system.
That's right. I guess let's get right into that. You basically had the keynote speech here at Inside Bitcoins, and you revealed that you want to, how can we say this nicely?
Drag Wall Street behind the barn and kill it with an axe.
Yeah. And create an alternative to the conventional stock market. Tell me a little bit more about that. For those who didn't hear your keynote speech that are listening to the podcast, give me a brief synopsis why it needs to be dragged behind the barn.
Well, there's a lot of bad things that happen on Wall Street, but really at the core of it all is the settlement system. And I believe the settlement system has been compromised, and some bad people have figured out how to use that. The regulators don't understand it, that there's a lot of market rigging going on. What Bitcoin presents, what the blockchain presents, is a way to have a peer-to-peer, one-to-one settlement system that doesn't run through any centralized institution that the bad folks can hijack.
Yeah, absolutely. So you explained with some pretty cool graphics in your talk about how it's not, when someone goes to invest and buy a stock, they're actually not buying it directly. They're not exchanging their money for the property rights to that stock. It's going through this
daisy chain. You think you own stock, but you don't. What you own are contractual rights against contractual rights against contractual rights. Someone somewhere down the line has the property rights. So all you have is a bunch of contractual rights, which are not as thick and meaty and trustworthy. So that's the system as it stands has been around since 1973, like that. That's how it works.
And at some point, you became aware of this, basically, that the stock market was a whole corrupt system, and these clearinghouses were very corrupt all the way down to the root, essentially. And you tried to expose that corruption, but got met with some resistance, shall we say.
Right. I got a lot of resistance and blowback until 2008. Once 2008 happened, people sort of shut up about how lunatic I was about this stuff. It's really at this point, it's such a corroded system. I don't think there is any way. 40 years ago, actually in the late 60s, there was a paperwork crisis on Wall Street. You used to have these people called jobbers who were running around on Wall Street with burlap sacks of stock certificates. They fell behind to the point that by 1971, Wall Street was only open 4 days a week and limited trading hours just because the settlement had gotten so far behind. So they designed, the industry worked with the SEC and designed a new system that is a central, all the stock gets put centrally and immobilized, and then all the trades are the contractual rights among different parties. So there's actually no property ownership anymore. It's a terrible system.
People are so under this illusion that they do own stocks.
You don't own anything. If you think you own stock, you're wrong. You have contractual rights against a firm which has contractual rights, against a firm which has contractual rights, against a firm which actually has the property rights. And on most days, That doesn't make any difference. Most days it works just fine, but someday it won't. And that's the reason that these clearinghouses have rules about in times of financial. What it means is it's basically a fractional reserve banking without a reserve requirement. Mm. It works most of the time, but under stress, you're going to find out that you own half or a third or a quarter of what you think you own. And it's written into the law. It's same within Europe. And there's on every bond issued in America and in Europe, for example, in stocks, there's these deep in the fine print is this codicil about in the event that there's not enough, that it turns out anyone in that daisy chain has sold more of something than they have. And some more people out there have contractual rights to property than there is the underlying property. Everyone's ownership just gets whacked back to be pari passu. And I believe that almost happened in 2008. But in any case, for example, there's something called rehypothecation of treasury instruments. The whole shadow banking system runs on rehypothecated treasury instruments. The typical treasury is rehypothecated 2 to 3 times, which means there are 3 to 4 people out there who think they own a treasury bond for every actual treasury bond that's out there.
Wow. That's a shocking statistic. But Patrick, don't we have these good regulators who are here to protect us from bad people in the stock market trying to take our money?
No, the regulators are shoeshine boys for the people who benefit from the corruption. As last week's disclosure about the the Federal Reserve, was it, and Goldman Sachs, and remember there was all on the national news last week, somebody had made 46 hours of tapes, a federal regulator who was in Goldman Sachs, documents exactly what I've known since 2005, that these guys, the federal regulators, are the towel boys. They're at the gym, in some posh gyms, how there's a guy standing there to hold your towel when you're in the locker room or something. They're the towel boys for Wall Street. They take their orders from Wall Street. They're looking to get hired by Wall Street. In fact, the pretense of law is worse than no law at all. It'd be better to have a system where people didn't think there was a government protecting them than to have what we have now. But we can trust the laws of mathematics to show up every day and do their job and not hope to be hired by Wall Street. And that's why the crypto revolution is so necessary.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that. But first, I just have a question. I mean, it's really interesting to me, like, who would volunteer for a job like that, exposing the corruption in a really corrupt system? How did you become interested in doing that? And why did you persist even in the face of so much negative resistance and threats, essentially?
I think I'm just sort of a hard-headed Irish guy. I wish I could claim it was flowed from some great ethics or philosophy or something, but I'm really just one of those Irish guys who can get pounded in the head with a 2x4 and keeps on fighting. So I think that's what it was.
Well, you're still here and you're still fighting, so that's great. In response to all this, everything you've learned, and by the way, you've got another website, which I didn't know about before, which is Deep Capture.
If you're a critic of Wall Street, Deep Capture, which my colleague Judd Bagley has been an integral part of, he who shall remain silent over there, has been voted in various weblog, web awards as the best website on corruption in the U.S., the best website on financial investigative journalism, all kinds of things. Deepcapture.com. We've been exploring Wall Street corruption and the unhealthy relationship between Wall Street and Washington, D.C. since about 2005.
Wow. That's something that not too many people know about. If maybe they buy some towels from Overstock, they have a little connection with you, but they didn't know what you're all about. So in response to acknowledging that the system is so corrupt, the Wall Street is just rotten from top to bottom, what you're proposing now that you just announced at this conference is creating an alternative to Wall Street based on cryptocurrency and cryptography.
Correct. We're creating a parallel universe, the ether of which, so to speak, would be counterparty. A parallel universe where everything you can do on Wall Street, stocks, bonds, derivatives, futures, you could do within this parallel universe, but you don't need the banks. And it's secure, it's one-to-one, it's decentralized, it's peer-to-peer, and there are not these central institutions that have gotten corrupted.
This is really, really interesting. I have a lot of questions about this, but first is, why did you choose Counterparty specifically as the platform for this to run on? Because there are a number of organizations out there. I hesitate to even call them companies, but there are a number of technologies out there that could maybe accomplish something like this. So why Counterparty?
Combination of technical and philosophical reasons. Technical reasons were that it was based in the blockchain, not an alternative to the blockchain. So
the Bitcoin
blockchain, which has been hammered on by hackers and everybody all over the world. So it's got the best history, it's the most secure. It's based on that. So that was attractive. But beyond that, the people who were involved, I talked to, and I don't mean to slag anybody that's that we didn't select, but the founders of Counterparty, I really liked the cut of their jib. They came out to see me. They were 3 young guys. They all looked like they were in college. As soon as they told me they had studied math, computer science, and philosophy, I knew they were the right guys, because nobody studies philosophy. You wouldn't put yourself through the study of philosophy if you weren't wrestling with the big questions. And there were all these, they stayed in Counterparty, they stayed true to the ethic of Bitcoin. It's open source, transparent. There were all these good things to say about Counterparty. They weren't guys just trying to make a fast buck. So for all these reasons, I knew sort of 10 minutes into my interview with them that these were the guys I wanted to. I'd met all these slick bankster types and some of the other groups, and good luck to them. It's a big universe. We can all get along in it, the crypto universe. But I knew 5 minutes into the interview with these other guys that they were the ones I wanted to go with.
Yeah. You've seen enough of the slick bankster types, I guess.
I've seen enough. And, I'm afraid that they're going to try to co-opt it. I think that there are slick bankster types coming into this, and they see what's happening. They see what this is going to do. And they're coming up with crypto equivalents of fractional reserve banking. Mm-hmm. I don't want to name any of the technologies, but there is, I'm told, that one of these competing technologies, at least one, is really just another it's a crypto version of fractional reserve banking. Well, that's what we're fleeing. That's not what we want to be involved with.
Paint a picture, I guess. What do you see as the vision of this alternative to Wall Street? Like, is someone going to open up a specific client for it, and they're going to have Coin, and they're going to have other maybe crypto equities in there? Or is it going to actually just be all through Counterparty?
Well, it's going to be, Robbie, why don't you answer that question?
So, for our folks listening who weren't aware, Robbie from Counterparty is also here. Welcome to the show.
What's the universe going to look like?
As far as this platform goes, basically? Yeah, it will be a separate platform that builds on top of some of the Counterparty functionality. The goal is you want to make a very easy-to-use user interface. The initial target user of this platform is going to be retail-type users. So you can maybe kind of think like a Coinbase or Circle for finance and investments rather than just buying and selling Bitcoin. Beyond that, we have a number of regulatory kind of hurdles to jump through on that front. Essentially, when you want to implement one of these systems, you have to stay compliant with certain regulations in order to list stocks. There's just a checklist of all these kinds of reporting requirements, things like that. So you have to factor that into the design of the system as well. So really, from a technical perspective, it's kind of like throwing that all into a pot, and then out of that, you get the actual working implementation out of that.
Okay, what are some of those regulatory requirements? I'm just curious about that.
Well, you have a certain kind of classification of trading system called an ATS, or an alternative trading system. And there's other ones within the SEC vocabulary, and these systems have their own kinds of regulatory requirements to that. There's a lot. You can actually look this stuff up online, up on the SEC's website, and it's just this long document. They go through all of these kinds of things as far as reporting requirements when a user signs in, certain ways that data needs to be visualized, certain kinds of things that need to be disclosed to users. It's really, you start at one point, and this is where we really have to get our foot into the door. There's a grand vision that we have of where this thing can go, and you run into things like that we mentioned earlier when we had all this at Patrick's keynote, like bearer certificates and things like that, where you can just trade these things totally decentralized on the Bitcoin blockchain, for instance, using Counterparty's decentralized exchange technology. But we're not 100% there yet. We have to start at one point, and then we just take steps to that, working with the regulators, working and just helping to evolve the framework. Because you got to remember, these laws all these laws were pretty much invented when crypto technology did not exist. And so things that made, like bearer certificates, you could forge those and you could make fake ones. And with cryptography and message signing, things like that, public key cryptography, that doesn't become an issue anymore.
What you envision getting to at some point, perhaps, is that there's investors, they can go onto, open up this software, and trade securities peer-to-peer without asking really anyone's permission? Or are they going to have to register with some central authority or anything like that? Or is it just totally peer-to-peer?
The grand vision is sort of independent of what you have to do to get to the grand vision.
Yeah, that's what I want to hear about now, and then we'll talk about how to get there.
If you're talking about like a utopian world where, everyone can own bearer shares, that would be great, but I don't really know if we're talking about even if we're talking about the idea of what to do next, it's unclear whether it makes sense to talk about that utopian world, if you know what I mean. It's just really, like, it has to be a step along the path at some point. And so, I don't really have a concrete idea there. Perhaps Patrick does.
Well, it's important not to confuse the map with the terrain. We can describe the terrain, but let's set aside the map and how we're going to get to. The terrain would be a universe where people can consensually trade property rights, real property rights, to each other without having to go through central institutions, which can, behind the scenes, really be practicing fractional reserve banking without a reserve requirement, which is what the current system amounts to.
Mm-hmm. And that's the second time you've said fractional reserve banking. Just for our listeners who aren't familiar with that and why it's a problem, can you give us a brief rundown?
Sure. Well, fractional reserve banking is when 100 people each deposit an ounce of gold, and some warehouse gives them a receipt that says, yes, we'll warehouse it. And then they realize, well, you can take 70 ounces and sell them and do other things with it. And as long as you keep sort of 30 ounces or 10 ounces there, and not everybody shows up on the same date, when people come to show up and say, well, I'd like to see if I still have my gold, you can always show them some gold. So it's what the Romans called it was a crime of expropriation to do that. In the background, for the whole history of banking, it was understood that some banks were doing that, the dishonest banks were doing that, and the honest banks, like the Medici Bank, were not practicing fractional reserve banking. But then, in 1844, in Britain, Robert Peel's Bank Act, legalized fractional reserve banking, and once you have fractional reserve banking, you need a central bank. Because eventually when you have fractional reserve banking, there's going to be a run on the bank, and then you need a lender of last resort. So that's in the banking system, but it's happening in the stock market. It's happening in commodities. Google the phrase gold rehypothecation scandal. There's far more people out there who think they own gold than there's actual gold being stored in the, and again, just as long as everybody doesn't show up on the same day. So there's 3 to 4 people think they own a treasury instrument for every actual treasury instrument. The whole shadow banking system, the lifeblood of the shadow banking system, is the rehypothecation of treasury instruments. And what rehypothecation means is sort of creating a daisy chain of copies. And so there's far more people think, and pension funds and so forth, think they own the treasury instrument than there is an actual underlying treasury instrument.
So with a crypto system, you would actually own what you think you own.
You own what you think you own. It can't be multiplied in some back room. People in some back room can't be holding 1 out of 10 just to fool the rubes into thinking they own what they own and doing stuff with the other 9 out of 10 and pocketing the value. But it's actual true peer-to-peer value transfer.
And I think just to say this is that Patrick mentioned the word shadow, and I think that's really one of the crucial points here is that all of this, pretty much all of these games that are going on in the financial system today are really depend on lack of transparency. It's a huge factor in it. And one of the design goals for this platform from the start is to have it be as transparent as possible. And that what that means is actually placing these actual financial transactions and these trades are done on the blockchain, and anybody can look at the blockchain and look at this data, this counterparty data on the Bitcoin blockchain and analyze what's going on. You may not necessarily be able to tie an address to an individual, but you will be able to see the trades, and we can use that to cross-check, and you can do all sorts of analysis on that. So the data's all out there, it's on the blockchain, and that's a huge jump from what it is today.
I did want to ask you about how you're going to handle this regulation side. Do we have 1 minute for that?
Sure.
Okay.
Perkins Coie is one of the premier law firms in America, and they have joined us as our partner. We're working together, and we're gonna sail through the regulatory shoals together.
I wish you luck in that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Glad you don't have to try to do it all yourself. All right. Thank you so much, Patrick. And Counterparty guys, you were here too. Thank you for being here. Where can people find you? Overstock.com.
Overstock.com, where the more you spend, the more you save.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Today's magic word is law. That's L-A-W, law. You've got until the 17th of October to visit letstalkbitcoin.com or the Let's Talk Bitcoin iPhone app and enter it for your share of the listener rewards.
Crypto revolutionaries, hackers, quants, mathematicians, bankers, maybe some criminals in here, maybe some feds. Welcome. What an honor to speak to you today. You may have heard a little bit about me in the past. If you had, Wired Magazine did a story on me earlier this year that called me beat Patrick Byrne, Bitcoin Messiah, CEO of Overstock, Scourge of Wall Street. I'm not the Messiah of anything. I'm a fellow traveler such as yourselves. Scourge of Wall Street, I think that is a fair description. I think it will become clear over the course of this presentation why I'm the Scourge of Wall Street. I won't tell you, well, I'll tell you how I became the Scourge of Wall Street. And that is, Overstock went public in 2002. And when you're the public company CEO, you tend to be out there in the mix. You're out there mingling with prime brokers and hedge funds and bankers and regulators and such. And it became very clear to me pretty quickly that there was a tremendous amount of criminality going on Wall Street. And I don't claim any special insight or prescience or brains to discover that. I was asked to take part. It was that simple. People asked me to take part. Then I started talking about, gee, there's a lot of criminality going on Wall Street. Then in 2007, just to give you, I'm not going to rehash what that whole war was about a decade ago, but in 2007, a very well-known hedge fund manager sat me down on Wall Street. Somebody else was there, witnessed this, and he said, you need to understand, Patrick, you are the most hated man I've ever known in my entire life. You used to be kind of a golden boy on Wall Street, but now you could kill people, and we wouldn't hate you like we hate you in this town. So please know that I hope they chisel on my mausoleum someday the most hated man on Wall Street in 2007. That's like my honor in my view. How did I get so sick? I started focusing. I became concerned about a single issue at the core of Wall Street. What that issue was described in 2008 when the markets were Chernobyling. Greenspan went before Congress in October to give his analysis of what was going on, and civilization was allegedly on the brink. And he said this very cryptic thing.
There are additional regulatory changes that this breakdown of the central pillar of competitive markets requires in order to return to stability, particularly in the areas of fraud, settlement, and securitization.
Well, fraud. We know what fraud is. Bernie Madoff is fraud. Securitization, that's mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, and such. But what's that middle thing? Settlement. Well, settlement, first thing to know, is insanely dull. And as dull as dishwater. And it's going to be hard to stay awake for the next 5 minutes as I explain what settlement is. But it should be of great concern to you in the crypto community because you will have an enormous role to play in fixing this problem. Settlement. Settlement at the highest level just refers to when some investors are buying some stock, they've got the money, some other guy has the stock, that's Gordon Gekko there, right? And the grandma and grandpa investor, they enter the market, they buy the stock, the stock and cash changes hands. That's called settlement. But in the real world, the two don't happen like they do as you would imagine in some simultaneously trade. There are different mechanisms for each, and the mechanisms are not necessarily linked. So the money changes hands through one mechanism and the stock through another. And of course, you don't have mom and pop investor talking to Gordon Gekko. Each are represented in the marketplace by broker-dealers.
and the money and stock changes hands between them. However, even that's a idealization, because what really goes on is both brokers are plumbed into an organization you probably never heard of, called the DTCC, or most normal people have not heard of. Curious, who here has heard of the DTCC? Raise your hand. Okay, about 5%, 10%. The broker-dealers are plumbed into the DTCC. That's the central clearing, the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation. And money and stock flows through it. However, the truth is it's even not that simple. The truth is there are about 1,500, 2,000 broker-dealers in the United States who are all wired into the DTCC. And as investors, as you're buying and selling stock, it's changing hands through the DTCC like that. Although it's actually even more, it's not that simple. All the money and stock actually exists and lives within the DTCC. And as you're trading, it's just going back and forth. Your broker-dealers all have accounts at the DTCC, and the money and stock is just passing back and forth among these accounts. Now, that's an enormous, actually I'm going to make one more point about this. Who here raise your hand if you own any stock in any public company in America. Raise your hand and hold it up, please. If you own any stock in any public company. Everyone with your hand raised is incorrect. Not a single one of you has any stock, has any property right in any stock. There's another company you've never heard of called CD & Company. CD is owned by the DTCC, it's a nominee. It owns everything. All the property rights and essentially all the stock in all publicly traded companies in America, the actual property rights are held by this company called CD & Company. The DTCC has a contractual right against that company, which actually has, and I'm not talking about the physical nature of the stock. Only 3% of stock is physical anymore, 97% is electronic. But I'm talking about the actual legal property right is all held by, every publicly traded company in America is, property rights are held by this corporation called CD & Company. It's the nominee of the DTCC. So in other words, the DTCC has a contractual right against it. Your broker-dealer has a contractual right against the DTCC. And in fact, there's another, to simplify things, I left it out. There's a whole bunch of broker-dealers who are the clearing brokers, who are the ones I show. And there's actually another ring, an outer ring, that each of these nodes can itself be the hub of a further expansion, and those are called referring brokers. So if you're with a referring broker, you think you have a property right in some stock because you bought it, you told your broker to buy it. What you really have is a contractual right against somebody who has a contractual right against somebody who has a contractual right against the DTCC, who has a contractual right against the CD & Company, which actually owns the property rights. Now, what that means is there's far more counterparty risk in the system than you have any idea exists. And things you think you own, if you read all that fine print, your broker contract, you'll find out you actually don't own anything. You have no property rights. You have contractual rights against contractual rights, against contractual rights, against property rights. And on most days, that's not going to make a difference. But on some days, it might. And in fact, both the DTCC and the Euroclear Corporation, which is the European version of this, have, again, if you read the fine print, it's all spelled out there. In the event of systemic instability, everything becomes just pari passu. And somebody doesn't really, I won't go into the details, but in the event of instability, you're going to find out you really don't own. If they've oversold things 3 or 4 times, you're going to find out you own about 1/4 as much as you think you own. Now, this is an enormous black box, this thing called the DTCC. It trades $5 quadrillion a year. It underlies the whole U.S. capital market. It's a black box. It's federally regulated, except on the days it doesn't want to be. When I got into this in 2004, first thing I did was try to find out who regulates it. It turns out the federal government didn't know who regulated it. The GAO did a study, couldn't figure out. There was and then I talked to both ex-SEC DOJ attorneys and a woman at the heart of the DTCC who had left. And said basically how it works is they send some kids over from the SEC once a year, and they say to the DTCC, who just buffalo them. They say, what do you do here, and are you doing it correctly? And the DTCC says yes, and the SEC goes away. So who owns the DTCC? It's owned by Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and a set of other broker-dealers who created this a few decades ago. They took pieces of their back office and they sort of mushed them all together and created this thing. And they have taken the position historically that it's not regulated because it's not a broker-dealer. It's as if you had all the dentists in Nevada got together and they formed some association that was, say, a buying group for the dentists. And then whoever regulates dentists in Nevada came and tried to look at them. They said, look, you don't regulate us. We're not a dentist. We're just an association formed by the dentists. So it's this, so in summary to this point, there's this opaque black box underlying our capital markets, trades about $5 quadrillion a year, and it's not clear who regulates it. It's got very flimsy regulation at best, and it's owned by the people who would profit from their it not being a very tight ship. So that's called, economists call that bad institutional design. America's full of advice to African countries about institutional design, how they should design the institutions of their society. That's a disaster waiting to happen. I'm going to mention, so as I started figuring this stuff out, one thing that's become clear is organized crime has its fingers deeply into the DTCC. Organized crime and the worst elements on Wall Street. And they figured out that there's slop in the settlement system and that they could avail themselves of that slop to rig the market and make a bunch of money while possibly destabilizing the market. When we developed very clear evidence that this was going on, that this was true, and by organized crime I mean the Genovese family in particular and Russian organized crime. And I mean, they're all over. They're all over this system. You dig in, and I'll be telling you where you can find documentation on that shortly. We started bringing this. Well, I got to back up here and tell you a story about Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell, this great British philosopher, although this has been attributed to Bertrand Russell and William James, this story may be apocryphal. But the story is that, as I've heard it, was Bertrand Russell was in India lecturing on Einstein's theory of relativity, and some Hindu cosmologist stood up in the back of the room and said, Professor, that's all incorrect. You don't understand. The universe rides on the back of a turtle. And Russell said, well, what's the turtle ride on? And the Hindu cosmologist said, rides on the back of another turtle. And Russell said, well, what's that turtle ride on? The fellow says, sorry, Professor, it's turtles all the way down. Well, we developed by very clear evidence of slop in the system that was being, in 04-05, that was being used to manipulate the market, rig the market, creating systemic risk, and that there was organized crime all over this. And we started bringing it to the people you would think you would bring such information to. And starting with the NASD, and I walked in with the ex-Undersecretary of Economics in the Commerce Department. I walked in with tough Italian guys from Staten Island who were part of that. It was funny. I remember some federal regulator once. If you're a financial guy, if you believe in EMH, efficient market hypothesis, you say none of this matters. It all comes out in the wash. It doesn't matter. Markets are perfectly efficient. God's in his heaven, etc. I told this one federal guy. By the way, I should also, fair warning. I've been targeted. I was told when I started going after this issue, Byrne, you don't understand. You were going to be retaliated against. I said, come on, this isn't Paraguay. I'm not going to. I became the object. As soon as I started talking about this stuff, 6 federal investigations started against me. Everyone costs $2 to $3 million. They go nowhere, they drop them, and a month later they start another federal investigation against me. It just goes on and on. I've got to wallpaper my room in federal subpoenas, and I don't spend 5 minutes a year worrying about it. But it was really quite an education. I remember under oath one time that I said to some Fed who had subpoenaed me, he was telling me that market manipulation is impossible because markets are efficient, and then you can't use the fact that there's slop in the settlement to manipulate markets. I told him, look, you can line up finance PhDs from here to MIT who will tell you that. I can line up tough Italian guys from here to Staten Island who are laughing up their sleeve that you guys don't understand how this works. And in fact, what I discovered, I went to NASDAQ, became part of FINRA, the SEC, the U.S. House Financial Services, Senate Banking Committee, the New York Financial Press, et cetera, et cetera. And what I gradually learned is our establishment that you think is out there protecting the American people is just turtles all the way down. There's nothing there. You think it's there. It's turtles all the way down. We are living under an oligarchy. They have captured all the institutions that we set up to protect us from the criminals. If you want to, so trading securities on Wall Street currently has certain features: centralized settlement, high frequency trading. About 2/3 of the volume or more in the securities is now just computers selling from one pocket to another 10,000 times a second. They say that as in price discovery. There's a wonderful book by Michael Lewis, came out about a year ago, called Flash Boys. It says pretty much the same thing, been saying since about 09, 08. None of that is actual. There's some theoretical reasons people think support this high frequency trading, but it adds nothing to the market. It's not volume, it's not liquidity, it's just activity. It's having, some guy figured out how to run a fiber optic pipe from Chicago to New York with a few less bends in it than somebody else's pipe. So the information got there a few nanoseconds faster, and it was a license to just print money, take money out of the market. There was a Journal of Finance article a couple years ago that said the point at which liquidity stopped adding any incremental value to U.S. capital markets came sometime in the late 1960s. All the liquidity since then has not made prices more efficient. I'm reminded Paul Volcker said that the last financial innovation that actually added value to society was the ATM machine. And the regulatory environment. Mostly the SEC. The shortcomings of these features are centralized settlement. It makes things quite easy to manipulate. High frequency trading allows really amounts to nuclear powered front running. They're just front running the public. They're front running the public's trades, and it's a license to suck money out of the marketplace. Regulatory environment exhibits deep capture. Deep capture, regulatory capture is when the regulator, it's an economist named Stigler, came up with this idea in about 72, and it has since that regulators that society sets up to protect us from industries can be captured by those industries. What in fact happens is, and they get turned against society. But my theory is it's not just the regulators, it's the whole system, it's the turtles all the way down. So, what would a better say? Oh, if you want to know more about this, I have a website called deepcapture.com. It's been documenting this stuff for 9 years. It's won the award as the best business investigative journalism in America, the best blog on corruption in America, et cetera, et cetera. Deep Capture. I gave a talk on YouTube once. I gave a talk in Washington once. That was some institute put up on YouTube called Economic Warfare as an Instrument of Transnational Organized Crime. These document all the involvement of organized crime in the financial systems I'm talking about. And if that all sounds kind of Looney Tune, I just want to mention that on July 27, 2011, Barack Obama signed an emergency order saying pretty much everything I just told you, that transnational organized crime has infiltrated the U.S. financial system and has rigged the markets and so on and so forth. So, if you want to know more about that, I may be in the wrong city if you're talking about too much about order. What's the simplest solution? When you have a system that is this corrupt, that is this bad, the simplest solution is like in this Wall Street, which I represent here as the bull. Simplest solution is to take it, drag it behind the barn, and kill the animals. What we should do instead is go to a blockchain. The virtues of a blockchain being that it is peer-to-peer settlement, so you can't manipulate. It's egalitarian, there is no front running, and instead of an central institution that can be captured, it's consensus-based and it's stateless. There's no mailing, just like there's no mailing address to send a subpoena, there's no organization for the bad guys to capture. how blockchain trading would work would look something like this, just a big peer-to-peer settlement system. So this is how it could be in theory. We at Overstock decided to explore this ourselves. We put up on o.info, which is a wiki guide at Overstock. We put up a page, how to issue a crypto security, and invited the community, the crypto revolutionary community, to come and contribute. We had a tremendous amount of great contributions. Turns out there's 13 different groups around the world working on using coming up with some sort of crypto alternative to the stock market. We studied it carefully. A lot of data made our life very much easier. People contributed on all these different alternative systems. And we enlisted the help of, well, here's a big announcement. If you're a journalist, here's an announcement. We wanted a law firm who could take us, be our partner in shepherding this through Washington, D.C., building an alternative to the stock market, building an alternative to Wall Street. Obviously, the feds are going to have an opinion. So, first major announcement today is one of the most blue chip law firms in America has joined forces with us. We have engaged them. They have made it a strategic decision to get it to be the leading law firm of the crypto revolution, and that is Perkins Coie. Will be Overstock's partner as we go through this process. And they helped us analyze the 13 different alternative systems. And at the end, we chose one of the 13 to be our partner, to be our platform. In fact, we not only chose this as our partner, but we hired 2 out of the 3 founders to move to Utah, along with a man with deep experience from the Wall Street side, a man with a great pedigree from Wall Street. They have moved to Utah. We've opened our checkbook. We've built a business unit within Overstock. We're hiring for it. We have essentially an open checkbook for them to build the crypto alternative to Wall Street. And who is that with whom we have engaged? Of the 13, this is the major announcement. We have selected Counterparty. With that, I would like to ask the 2 of the 3 founders of Counterparty to come up, Robbie Dermody and Evan Wagner, along with Mark Smith and Judd Bagley. Come on up, Judd. And I'm sure you have many questions about this. Myself, I don't really know what end of the blockchain gets plugged into the wall out there. So I'm sure there are questions. We have about 10 minutes, and fire when ready.
Is this what the mic's on?
The mic's on. Well, you can always come up and use this mic.
I think before we get started.
Oh, go ahead.
All right. Before I get started, I want to say that this is actually a big victory for Bitcoin itself. Counterparty rides on Bitcoin, and so this is the Inside Bitcoin conference. So I think everyone here should be really, hopefully, pleased with. It's not just Counterparty; it's Bitcoin, and then it's blockchain technologies in general. So.
I actually was going to ask something. Yeah, Dan Davison from TakeMyBitcoins.tv, please watch. I was going to ask you exactly that, because when I read the protocol for Mastercoin and Colorcoin, I thought to myself, this is a market. But how does Bitcoin relate to those kind of technologies? And what kind of technologies are you using to get us to the blockchain to those points?
Yeah, basically Counterparty rides on Bitcoin, so it's embedding data into the Bitcoin blockchain. And so it's any Counterparty transaction is a normal Bitcoin transaction, basically.
So are you equivalent of Mastercoin or Colorcoin?
It's similar. It's what's called an embedded consensus system. It's different than Colored Coins itself, but it's very similar to how Mastercoin functions.
This is brilliant. Thank you. I do have a question, though, and that is, how does one distinguish between, and what are the distinguishing characteristics that would allow us to differentiate between international organized crime and Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan?
Sounds like you've been reading Key Capture. That is the point, that there's a very blurry line between international organized crime and the hedge fund community and the prime brokers who serve them.
And have there been established connections to the Federal Reserve Bank yet?
Not on my watch, but if you go into Deep Capture, you will find hundreds and hundreds of pages of how, and if this sounds Looney Tune, for example, the largest FBI sweep of the mafia in U.S. history was something called Operation Uptick, where they went out in 2001 and rounded up 120 gangsters, mafiosi from around Wall Street. And I mean, Genovese family and Russian organized crime started by a guy named Felix Sater, who left in a locker, a handbag in a locker in some gym in New York, forgot to pay his rent. The guy picked it up and turns out to have some paperwork and some guns. And he called the feds, and because he saw the guns, well, the paperwork turned out to outline this enormous market manipulation scheme, and they arrested 120 people on Wall Street for it. So there have been, for some reason it does not get reported, maybe journalists are too scared, but there are individual data points of dozens and dozens of indictments against organized crime operating on Wall Street. But for some reason, nobody sort of puts all the points together into one picture. Go ahead, sir.
Well, it sounds great and a good effort. The main concern, though, is the very same people you're talking about is who you're going to have to go against. So how are you going to attack that? I mean, to establish an exchange, you have to go through the SEC. Those same turtles are going to exist in your business model, won't they? And if you do a standing separate, like the BitShares guys, they were creating a similar type of network. You know, what is your plan different? How are you going to combat the SEC and other obstacles?
I'm going to turn that over to Mark Smith.
So there is a tradition on Wall Street for change, disintermediation, for markets to improve. And in order for us to really disrupt and to do what our passion and our project goal is, we have to identify and decide how to remove the pieces that don't work. I think Patrick did a good job with that. We then identify the pieces that do work and operate inside a regulatory construct that can be successful. So we don't necessarily see this as taking it behind the barn and using the axe. We see it as using a surgeon's scalpel, carving out the cancer, replacing it with healthy cells, and letting the new cells take over the whole network. And that's what our goal will be, and that's how we'll end up being able to disintermediate those nefarious actors by operating a decentralized marketplace. That will allow them to not have the opportunity to usurp an institution like the DTC.
And I should add, so first of all, my last investigation against me was stopped a few years ago. So I've been, and every single one went nowhere, and nothing came and so forth. And they've stopped that one. And I'm sort of back on speaking terms with the regulators. And my impression in the last few weeks, it has been made very clear to me. Don't know, this is, maybe it's empty words, but the regulators are making clear to me that they understand that this is coming. And they're not interested in, that they're open-minded about it. They're open-minded, they want to see it develop in a way that doesn't enable a lot of bad guys to do, other kinds of bad guys to do bad things. But they're at least telling me that they're going to be a cooperative, adult partner to work with as we develop an alternative system.
Can you provide more details on that system? It sounds like not only will Overstock's stock be listed on this new Wall Street, but it sounds like other public companies will be able to list there, or if somebody wanted to fund a new venture here, they'd be able to list there. Is that what you guys are building?
We're building the platform so anyone can list. I mean, so other companies can go public, and then we're going to be the first to use it by issuing an O coin. That will be the first crypto security. But why don't you fellows take that? What more detail do you want to give? My colleagues here are notoriously closed now. They're probably already wincing at what I've said. Evan, why don't you say anything else you want to say? Robbie?
I mean, I would just say that, yeah, you can. It's possible to create, as it were, like a parallel stock market, essentially, on which there's, I guess, less manipulation inherent in the stock market itself. And that's indeed what we're trying to create. And there are some
regulatory throughways that are already provided, which one might do that.
Exactly. And Mark knows quite a bit about those. In fact, Mark has already built an ECN and an ATS, an alternate trading system.
And there's already a concept on the street, what's called a PIPE, which is a private investment in a public entity. So there's already a concept of duly listed securities, private and public, and then the opportunity to be able to have a parallel system that operates, as Patrick pointed out, you may not have recognized, was there is a parallel system that exists with the DTC, and that is a bearer system. The old certificate bearer system still exists. 2 to 3% exists in bearer certificates. If you go buy shares of Google today, you can ask your broker-dealer to buy it through what's called a Type 1 account, pay cash, and ask to receive those certificates. When you receive those certificates, you basically opted out of the system that has been manipulated. When we talk about digital tokens, like an O-coin, in effect, that's a new way to have a bearer certificate.
Incidentally, all my ownership of Overstock is in paper shares. Long ago, everything in paper. I don't trust any of that system. Next question.
Oh, I'm over the moon. The only thing that could make me more excited about this announcement is if you tell us when you intend to put it on GitHub.
On GitHub? Well, what do you want to say? How far is it developed on
Yeah. I mean, this platform under the covers, it uses Counterparty for the transactions embedding Bitcoin. All that stuff is on GitHub. It's been open source from the start. Beyond that, we can't say much beyond that. I think the main thing with this is really moving the services side of things forward. Where you're essentially taking these outrageous fees and all this middleman infrastructure, and you're really bearing it down to just about nothing, and you're taking the fees and you're taking down to 20% or less of what people would pay. And I think doing that, you have more money that ends up in the businesses that are raising funds, more money that ends up, or the retail investors, regular investors, mom and pops, whatever the case is, get a better deal at the end of the day. So there's a huge benefit that we see from there. As far as the actual technology itself, that's still materializing at this point for the platform.
Yeah. But we do have we believe that we can bring this to market and provide the same services Wall Street does in terms of issuing stock, bonds, derivatives, trading them at 20% or less of the cost of the price of what Wall Street charges. Sorry.
I've got two questions as someone who's looking at this same type of thing. The bearer share analogy, I think, is very apt. I've made that analogy before, but bearer shares also heavily regulated because they are used to avoid taxes, and they have to be registered or put in custodian, immobilized, I guess is the word they're using, and generally made more legal. And you're saying that this provides an alternative to the bearer share system. I was just curious if there's any of the conversations you've had with Pretense, whether they've made a comment on the nature of bearer shares and how much of the regulations are you going to have to implement to get our party to be compliant with those types of things?
Well, we do intend. I can live without another federal investigation in my life, but my goal is to comply with all the federal regulations that I have to comply with, which is kind of a circular promise. But no more than that. Mark, why don't you address this?
There are certain regulatory approvals that you can receive to be able to operate markets in a different way than the standard markets operate today. We will be compliant across all those regulations, and we will operate under a regulated umbrella. More than that, I'd rather not say at this point. But you'll see over time, our big effort is to really make changes, and you make changes from the inside. And so that's where we'll be operating.
And when you're making those changes, are you doing it in any way that can allow other parties to follow the same rules to operate competitive solutions?
Certainly, from the structure standpoint, it's proprietary in thought, but it won't be proprietary in operation. So certainly other people could follow on.
In fact, we view ourselves as the icebreaker. We're doing the heavy lifting. The other people are trying to do similar things. We look very carefully at all 13. And one of the things, and there's good people among them, some not so good people and some good people and good programs among them. We chose to go with Counterparty because of their commitment to the philosophy that animates Bitcoin. The open source nature, transparent nature, et cetera. It's not proprietary. So so that's why we chose Counterparty, but it isn't our goal to rule out other people who have those systems. In fact, and we'll make it easier for you because we're doing the heavy lifting and the multi-million-dollar expense of figuring out with the regulators how this can be done.
As of about 5 minutes ago, Counterparty was trading 46% higher than it was yesterday. And I'm wondering, because the announcement is quite fresh, do you think there was any insider trading going on? Who did you guys...
I have a direct link to Peter in my head, yes. I was trading some shares while we were up here. No, it's hard to tell. I mean, we've made a big attempt to keep this as closed loop and have leaks. And you know, I think if you know anything about the Counterparty team, you know that we're uncharacteristically tight-lipped in this industry. So, but you know, when you deal with different organizations, when you have different organizations you deal with, those organizations are all under NDAs, but you really can't tell as far as what's going on with that.
I can add one thing. Basically, as I stood up on the stage, just a couple moments before, Wired magazine has published a story about this.
Yeah, there's that too.
So yeah, so what actually came out?
It's about
So if you go back and look at the timestamps on the XCP trading prior to the article coming out, you see it was relatively flat.
One of the gentlemen just asked, now that you made the announcement, when does this all go into effect? When does all of this
We're headed to Utah tomorrow morning. These guys have an open checkbook. We've already hired several developers for the team. They will be making an announcement in a few weeks about some of the talent we brought in. And I think in the absence of there being a government, this could be done in about 3 months. But with there being a government, I probably want to assume 4 or 5 or longer. You now know everything.
You're generous, Patrick.
More than 4 or 5.
Well, on that note, you know what? This was absolutely fantastic. And we thank all of you. We especially thank you. You are a huge advocate for Bitcoin, and we really appreciate what you're doing. Let's give these guys a huge round of applause.
Thanks for listening to episode 153 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's episode was provided by Stephanie Murphy, Patrick Byrne, Robbie from Counterparty, and others. Music for today's show is provided by Jared Rubens and General Fuzz. This episode was edited by Adam B. Levine. See you next time.